Welcome to everybody coming in from the lobby. Thank you for your patience. We'll be getting underway just as soon as I can see that everybody's got in here. You should be able to see the title of today's online seminar, number 11, from the Moving the Needle, Creating the Future Together series hosted by GIZ FABRIC Asia, and today's topic, the future of the Asian textile and apparel industry. We've got three experts on the panel today. We have David Williams, project manager from the International Labour Organization Decent Working Garment Supply Chains Asia program. We have Mr. David Birnbaum, who's the founder of Third Horizon Limited, with a lifetime of experience in the industry. And we have Mr. Kong Apit, president of the Coalition of Cambodia Apparel Workers Democratic Union, the CCAWDU. We're just having a little bit of a problem with technical-wise with Kong Apit, but we hope we can resolve that. He is online, but we can't quite get him to fully appear and be heard. But I'm sure as we go through, we'll get there. So the future of Asian textile and apparel industry. So we are nearly 3 years into the virus, the COVID-19 pandemic. And the industry is still taking stock of the impact, the implications for business, for workers, for consumers, a whole range of stakeholders. And I've been reading since the pandemic hit about the future of the industry. In fact, I've been reading about the future of the industry for a long time. But discussions about the future of the industry pre-virus and post-virus seem to have taken a different sort of feel. I've been looking back through articles on sustainability and fashion from 2018 and 2019 for some work that I'm doing. So, what the media, what are the stories about the fashion industry with sustainability in the media? There's a very different kind of discussion about the industry. When the pandemic hit, it wasn't very long before we started hearing people talking about an industry reset, that the pandemic showed all the problems with the supply chain, with the retail, we heard a lot of people talking about we need to reset, we need to rethink power relationships between buyers and producers. Consumers became more savvy about what's happening in the supply chain, and so on and so forth. We've just had a Channel 4 documentary in the UK on Shein, the untold story about workers in China, the conditions under which they're working. This is not new. This sort of thing was, television was making documentaries about Primark supply chain nearly 20 years ago. So none of this is new, but I think the conversation has shifted. And I read the other day in Bloomberg that the word normal is now creeping back into the outlook for 2023 when logistics managers and others start thinking about the supply chain. In the latest Logistic Managers Index, the September's future predictions hint at normalization and a return to business as usual over the next year. And I'm quoting there a story by Brendan Murray on the 10th of October from Bloomberg. And so we thought it was high time to get some experts in to really discuss what does the future look like? What did the future look like pre-pandemic? What does the future look like now? And what sort of pathways do people think are possible from now on, looking into the future? So this is kind of the setting for today's panel discussion. Before I introduce the guests in a little more detail and start letting them tell us their views, three things just very quickly. Number one, as always, this is recorded, and a copy of the video of the seminar will be available online. And if you're attending, you'll get an email with a link for that sometime in the future, in the next week or so. Number two, questions and answers. You can put your questions into the chat box. If you've got a question specific to one of the guests, can you please just say, my question is to David. Remember, we got two Davids. We got David B and David W. So don't just say David if it's to one of the Davids. And thirdly, we will have a little poll, a little survey poll towards the end of this, with the last 10 minutes, last 5 minutes, which is just to ask you what you thought of the seminar, how you think we can improve, if you've got any topics that you think we should cover, anything interesting that you think we haven't covered yet, that you think we should, by all means tell us. And certainly if we get enough people telling us that something is interesting that we haven't thought about, we will certainly get onto it. Okay, that's enough of that. Let's have a look at our three guests. As I said, David Williams from the ILO, labour economist, sustainability professional, who spent a good part of the last decade managing ILO programs in global supply chains. He's now at the ILO regional office in Bangkok, and he was previously the deputy manager for Better Work Vietnam. Many of you will be familiar with the Better Work program, obviously. David was with Better Work Vietnam, has been involved in the apparel sector for a long time. He has an MA in international politics, and we're very glad he's with us today. We also have David Birnbaum, the founder of Third Horizons. David, I think many of you will be already familiar with. He's got a lifetime of experience in the industry, garment exports, solving problems, developing solutions, implementing one-of-a-kind strategies. He's worked in 36 countries, in which he's constructed, operated, owned factories, taught advanced courses in all sorts of places around the world, at universities and institutes. He's got 11 books to his name, each of them tackling pressing problems in the industry, and I can't think of a better person to have on a panel talking about the future of the industry, given his long experience here. Many of you will have seen him writing in Just Style magazine, and if you're on LinkedIn, I would seriously suggest that you follow him. David's always got something interesting to say on LinkedIn, very worthwhile following. Our third guest, I'm not quite sure whether he's online or not yet, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. Mr. Kong Athet, trade unionist from Cambodia. The CCAWDU, the union, is affiliated with Industrial, the Industrial Global Union, and he is in charge of the union that represents 50,000 garment workers in Cambodia. He joined the union in 1999 while he was working in a factory laundry. He was dismissed from his job because of his union activities, and so he's gone on to be a full-time union representative. And his aim is to represent garment workers with one voice and carry out research on working conditions, economic and social context, and to build international relations in defence of worker rights. And so he will be bringing us a trade union perspective. So we've got three quite different speakers here. I'm going to begin with Dave Williams, and not because I think David's the most important or not, but because David's been involved with some research with Cornell University. So there is a project underway between ILO and Cornell University in the US called the New Conversations Project. You may have seen some of the publications coming out of that. They've started to release some of their work. They're doing a lot of work on the garment industry, particularly in the Asian region, and have been looking very carefully at what's happening here and what may happen. So I think David's talking about some of that work at the ILO Cornell University project, I thought would be really interesting, be very good at context setting for where we're going to go for the rest of the panel. And so David Williams, could you start by telling us something about the project, and then perhaps just a very brief outline of the work that the New Conversations Project has been doing specifically with regards to the Asian textile and apparel industry?
Thanks, Stephen, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone who's joining this event today. Thanks for inviting me in to speak to you all. Yeah, I'm working with the ILO in the regional office in Bangkok, and as you said, Stephen, we have an ongoing partnership now with the Labor Relations School in Cornell University in the US. We've been working with Jason Judd and his team. Many of you would be familiar with Jason's work in global supply chains and labor in global supply chains. So basically, we kind of forged this partnership during the early period of the pandemic, and our rationale for doing so was really to put our heads together collectively within the ILO, within the Better Work program, which is the flagship ILO program, with the program that I run at the regional level, and with Jason's team and expertise at Cornell to first and foremost try and understand and document what was happening during the pandemic in the global garment industry, with a particular focus on Asia and the Asian end of the supply chain. So we really wanted to kind of track the situation, understand the dynamics, look at some of the trends, so that we, particularly on the ILO side, that could really help inform the guidance and advice and support that we were giving to our constituents in the government, in the trade unions, and with the industry, the employers. So we really, we wanted to understand the situation and monitor it. And what followed from that has been so far a three-part research series that has covered 3 points in time. First of all, at the end of 2020, which was really all about kind of assessing the damage as it was unfolding. You know, the impact of the pandemic on the supply chain, on the garment industry, on the workers in the factories, and then moving forward into kind of mid 2021, we wanted to kind of update the data and our understanding of the impact, and then also try to look ahead and think what this means for the industry. And in that endeavor, we outlined a number of possible scenarios as to how the industry might shake out after COVID had waned. So that brings us up to 2022, and we checked in again on this research partnership, and we're now kind of reflecting on what just happened, and we're really looking at, as you said, Stephen, in your introduction, you know, some of those brand commitments, some of that talk about the industry being at a turning point, being at a fork in the road, needing a rethink. We wanted to check back in on that, update the data, of course, as we have been doing all along, but also check in with the stakeholders themselves, talk to the industry, talk to the trade unions, talk to the brands, talk to the policymakers and the businesses, and get a sense of what they feel as we move out of the crisis, and that we move into questions of resilience and sustainability in the long run. And really, I mean, from a personal perspective, I really wanted to try to understand to what extent we are seeing a new normal in the industry from a sustainability standpoint and from a decent working conditions, labor rights standpoint. Where are we really relative to the commitments that were made during the pandemic? So we used data, we used national and industry data that was widely available, but we also triangulated this with first-hand qualitative evidence from stakeholder interviews and focus groups and that kind of thing. So we have a number of publications that are out that follow this process, you know, from 2020 up until now, and we have some research that will come out in a couple of weeks as well. So I can give maybe some insights in that regard.
Well, I'll be looking. I look forward to anything that comes out of this project. So I'll be keeping an eye open for the publication that's coming out soon. So looking at national data, looking at, so you've got quantitative and qualitative research. You've been talking to people. You've been doing focus group research. So the question then is, well, what are the key things? What are the key things that are coming out of this research? What are the possible scenarios? You mentioned, I think you mentioned 3 possible scenarios in that, you know, looking ahead. So what are you finding?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the second piece of research that we put together was really the interesting one, because we all have an interest, and I think everyone working in the sustainability space has an interest in or a vision in their mind as to what the industry could look like and should look like in the future. So during that exercise in 2021, we wanted to put together some scenarios that the industry might follow. And yeah, in that exercise, we essentially looked at 3 possible options, and we called them repeat, regain, and renegotiate. I mean, I can go into a little bit of detail just at the outset. The repeat scenario was very much the business as usual scenario, the idea that the industry would revert to default. There would be no deliberate reform efforts in the industry when we look at kind of the structure of it, the way it's governed, the dynamics, and that there would be a continuation of pre-COVID trends. Now, when we talk about the pre-COVID trends, we know that the industry wasn't standing still even before the pandemic. There were a lot of global trends which were buffering the industry, and those trends include kind of technological change, the kind of emerging climate crisis and the environmental agenda. There were questions around the governance of the supply chain and the unfair balance of risk and reward, and the division between private governance and public governance of the apparel supply chain. So basically, but the repeat scenario, the idea of going back to business as usual, was the first possible scenario that we thought might return. Essentially, business would return to how it was. The regain scenario was a little bit different in the sense that it, as we laid it out, it would resemble a kind of accelerated version of the repeat scenario. There would be a continuation and maybe an acceleration of the pre-COVID trends, but we would also see some bifurcation, some division of the industry between winners and losers, and there would be a kind of emergence of this more kind of more competitive, more sustainable, more profitable, more responsible businesses in the supply chain. And then there would be the so-called losers in the industry, which would become increasingly peripheral or increasingly kind of unsustainable and kind of struggling to innovate and improve working conditions as well. So that was the regain scenario. And then the third scenario was much more of a transformative scenario, and that was renegotiate. So this would be where you would see more deliberate structural reforms that would change the real power dynamics of the relationships and the governance of the apparel supply chain. And then there would be, alongside that, there would be deeper and wider industry partnerships to address collective challenges and there would be a real centralization of sustainability in the core business model of the garment industry. So those are the three scenarios, and we built that around around the evidence that we already had and the conversations that we were having with the industry. I can go into a little bit more about, you know, what we think has changed, what it resembles, which scenario looks the most likely as we speak now, or I can come back around to that in a few moments.
Well, let me just ask one question. Maybe you can give a brief answer to this, and we can come back to it after I talk with. I'm going to ask David Birnbaum something in a minute. But out of those three, you've got repeat, you've got regain, and you've got renegotiate. When you've been holding your focus groups, when you've been doing your interviews, and you know you're interviewing players in the industry in Asia, right? So some of the people on the call you may have interviewed, I don't know. But which one of those scenarios, these three possible scenarios, do you get the feeling is, you know, which one resonates most with people in the industry or stakeholders in the industry?
I think at the outset we could say that there is some division, some differences of opinion among the various stakeholders that we've spoken to. But I certainly think the most transformative scenario, the renegotiate one, is not the one that is emerging as the most visible. I think somewhere between repeat and regain are probably more in the ballpark of what we're talking about now. There are elements of all three scenarios in what we see as the current industry situation. You know, there is elements of that pre-existing trends are continuing, but the fundamentals around you know, the structure of the industry, the predominance of fast fashion, the relationships based purely on commercial grounds, they remain much the same. But there are also evidence of the kind of regain scenario where some brands are genuinely restructuring their business models, and they're really taking structural challenges seriously. And they're investing in things like social protection to help to prevent the fallout from future crises. What we don't see, by and large, is efforts to really renegotiate the rules of the game in the garment industry and the division of risk and reward and things like that. Yeah,
and I think this is a very interesting finding, and you know, it goes back to what I was saying in my beginning remarks. If we go back to the early stages of the virus, you know, we got a lot of commentary. We got a lot of commentary in the media. We got a lot of commentary coming from all sorts of industry experts telling us this was the opportunity to what this project is calling renegotiate, you know, structural reform. You know, and a lot of talk like this, and yet, you know, nearly 3 years later, we seem to be somewhere between repeat and regain. I want to turn to David Birnbaum now. Thanks very much, David Williams. David Birnbaum, I'm going to ask you a few questions, but I'll just start off by, do you have any response to the ILO Cornell research project and its findings? Does that resonate with you, that we're somewhere between repeat and regain rather than renegotiate?
You're the great outlier. I think we have lost the ability to predict the present. We don't know what's going on. Not the institutes, not the education, not the industry. My God, we just finished 2022, which was supposed to be the best year for garments since sliced bread. And they basically not only destroyed most of the companies in the United States, but many of the suppliers in Asia. You know, we're looking at what we don't see is the importance of the COVID-19 virus. The real importance, it was the first instance where the industry lost complete control of the direction in which it's traveled. We didn't bring the virus. We couldn't stop the virus. We just became the victims of the virus. What we didn't see now is that the COVID-19 was the first of a whole series of outside controls of which we have no real ability to stop. Do you really think that we're going to do anything about global warming, stagflation? We're going to do anything about the mass resignation? We're going to do anything about the crisis, the crisis of transportation, weaponization of trade? You know, we look at sustainability and we don't understand that the global warming is going to change it for us. You know, we've made a tremendous effort, and there are good people everywhere who really want to be sustainable. People have given up driving their cars, and they are taking bicycles to work. People have separated their garbage. People want to live a sustainable life. The truth is, these people are so small, have such minor influence that it's not even worthwhile counting. The bulk of the people, if you're looking at the factories, you're looking at the customers, they haven't even begun to understand what's happening. Now, the great example is Boohoo. Excuse me, I say this is the apotheosis of what's wrong with the industry. They have decided they are going to be sustainable. And the way they were going to be sustainable was to bring in one of the Kardashian sisters to be responsible for sustainability. This is a joke.
Right.
You know, and what is terrible is that it leads us to recognize a fault in leadership and management. Because on the customer side, on the retail side, they still believe that you and me, we're a bunch of morons. We're going to follow whatever they say, and it's not happening. The reality is that 2022 was a horrible year for this planet. You had forest fires, you had droughts, you had floods, and 2023 is going to be worse. Let's face it, it's going to be worse every year, and people are getting upset. And this idea of greenwashing, put a label and say we're 100% sustainable, that's out. We are going to be holding governments in the importing countries, whether it's the United States or the EU or the Scandinavian countries, or even the wealthy countries in Asia, Korea, Japan. They're going to start holding the polluters responsible, not on a factory by factory basis, but on a national basis. If your country has air pollution, your country has water degradation, if your country has particulates which add to global warming, don't ship the garments to us. That's going to happen. It has to happen because the average citizen in these countries is getting angry. And it's going to change the whole global outlook. You know, the reality is that globalization, as we understand it, is rapidly disappearing. It's going to be replaced by regionalization. It's going to be replaced by nearshoring, reshoring. It has to. And this is not just global warming. Global warming is just the first of these things. You look at stagflation. You see that you have inflation plus recession. And the real inflation is taking place on the consumer price index. So that people are paying more money for food. Those people who suggest that the solution is for sustainability to go back to rayon, viscose, and that we should plant trees to develop this. We need that land for food. We don't need the land to grow corn for ethanol. We need the land for food. And the real area of artificial fibers are areas that take advantage of waste, agricultural waste, using pineapple, using coconut fibers. There are suggestions of using coffee grounds. These take existing problems of sustainability and solve them. But you know, we have tried with others to do something, to go into countries and to suggest, why don't you go to sustainability? It's a money maker. The actual costs of development, are not great. There is a, especially in the textile sectors in South Asia, there is a complete desire not to do anything. And even Japan, when they're trying to do something, they're trying to do something with wood products, not with the real area of sustainability. These things are going to change because the world is going to go into a serious recession because of global warming. We can't afford it otherwise. We have to start looking at the fact that we have lost control of the industry, and we have to build a new industry where we can deal effectively with the areas that are controlled. That's basically, my view on the subject.
Well then, so just to come back to something that you said about reshoring, nearshoring, a shift from globalization to regionalization. What does that realistically mean for Asia? What does that mean for producers, in Asia?
For one thing, if you're thinking of moving goods, increasing your market share from Bangladesh to the United States, better off increasing your market share where you have some geographic benefit. Go to Japan, go to UAE, go to the places nearby.
Right.
The important thing is you have to recognize that the old solutions are not going to work anymore. The garment industry is going to get smaller, only because of stagflation. People have less money; they're going to buy fewer garments, and that's happening now. In the United States, the increase in garment sales is more than offset by inflation, which means people buy fewer garments, just paying more for them, and they're becoming more selective. There was a time when people would accept things. Yes, the fit wasn't 100%, the make wasn't all that good, the fabric was crummy, but I like it. It's new. It's different. It's gone. And the people who are doing fast fashion, the Boohoo people, the Shein people, even the people at Amazon, they're in trouble. Amazon shares are down, I don't know, 30% this year. Boohoo has real financial difficulties because fast fashion is meaning now, yes, I'm going to take everything for instantaneous gratification, but I'm going to return it all tomorrow. That's what happens. The business model that we had is failing.
So who survives in Asia? The companies that are able to capture market close by.
Okay. There's going to be a new industry. It's not just an improvement of the old industry, but a brand new industry. And that industry will require a whole new definition of what a factory is, a whole new technology. We have to become part of it. For example, if you are a factory and you are shipping goods, you have to recognize that the real profit is on the other side. The real profit is on the retail side. My God, the actual value of FOB price that is controlled by the factory. If it's fashion goods, it's less than 1% of retail. Because the fabric isn't there. It's the fabric that they're being sourced outside. They can't change the overheads. So they have to become part of this. And they can, if they recognize that the way forward is to have small quantities of interesting goods on the internet. And there's a whole world out there. There are companies, wherever you go, incubators, who have loads of startups on the internet, talented people. There are people who have, young people who have tens of millions of followers, influencers. You have a factory, a responsible factory, you get together with an influencer, you look at what's out there in the new startups, and you build a section of your factory to have cutting one piece at a time, a micro factory. And because you're the factory, you can ship directly to the customer. So I don't know, you're the factory, you're retail, I don't know what you are, but this is the new industry. There are hundreds of possibilities out there. One of the great things about times of disaster is that it's times for opportunity. But you have to escape. You have to start looking about where you want to be going forward and how am I going to get there.
David Williams, have you got any response to that? Before I'm going to go to Kong Athit in a minute. Don't worry, Athit, I'm going to get to you. But David Williams, have you got any anything to say about that?
No, I mean it does chime with the conversations that we've been having with the industry. So you know, I think it aligns quite well with what I alluded to earlier on in regard of there being an emerging class of businesses that will take those opportunities and that will seize the initiative to change their business models, and that we may see a growing bifurcation of the industry, and you'll see a bigger gap between those that are doing things right or responsible or productive or innovatively, and those that are doing the rest. And there will be a segment of the industry that will fall behind, and the extent to which that is greater or lesser will also depend on the governance landscape, and of course global economic trends, what we're going to see, because we're in a very, very difficult situation now, as probably people on this call would attest to, you know, coming from the business side.
Can I give you an example? This business about reshoring, nearshoring. It's an important step forward, but not in the United States. The United States can't reshore. That's the truth. And they can't even nearshore, because what do you have? You have Mexico, which is pretty good, especially in commodity goods. Canada, which has an interesting industry. But the big industries in South America, and the South Americans are not in the garment export business, particularly to the United States. So where are you going to go?
This is also, I would agree with this. You know, nearshoring has been fairly limited in the garment industry up until this point. Trade deals have tried to incentivize this, but capacity and costs in various places have limited it. Yeah, the real kind of attractive destinations remain very far from market, the consumer market, and that is South and Southeast Asia. And they have continued to dominate the apparel trade.
Let me give you an interesting example of data. The world's largest garment exporter is China. You know who number 2 is?
Can you hear some David? David Birnbaum, did you want to say something more? David, your mic is not working. You're muted, David Birnbaum.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes. Go ahead.
The number 2 garment exporter in the world is the EU. Where does that put you with your view that cheap labor is important? Where does that put you with the idea that commodities are important? We know the EU has probably the best garment industry going, and probably will overtake China this year. One of the reasons is that they have access to the greatest fashion textile industry in the world. Also, they have decent factories. Also, they have real speed to market. We have to stop thinking that we're living in the 1970s, where cheap labor is going to mean something, where low FOB price is going to mean something. We have to start thinking in terms of the customer who is buying less is going to be demanding more. I don't like your fit. I don't like your make. I don't like I don't like what you're doing. I don't like the garment. You give me boring designs. One of the reasons why small internet companies are doing well is because they don't have market share. They want to be different. They want to be special. And all they care about is getting enough customers to make a living. The big internet companies, they're in trouble.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about here, David. You mentioned cheap labor, which I think is a nice segue to go and talk to Kong Athit, head of a trade union in Cambodia. Now I should mention that Kong Athit is a trade unionist in Cambodia, but I think he certainly has a good feel for the lay of the land through Asia generally. Kong, Athit, David Birnbaum has been talking about globalization, reduction of globalization, beginnings of a new regionalization. Producers in Asia will need to start looking at regional markets to sell their products rather than rather than Bangladesh looking at the US, or Cambodia looking at the US, looking for markets closer to home. From a trade unionist perspective, how do you see all of this? All this talk about regionalization, what does that mean for Cambodia, do you think, or for workers?
Thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you, David. I don't really totally understood the complexity of the global business and things, but yeah. So interestingly, to talk about cheap labor and to seek for the new market in Asia. So even in Cambodia, the governments and the private sectors, the Millennium Plan of the government, they also including this strategy in the coming 5 years. So they are not only focused the market in US and the EU markets. They also try to find the strategy and the capacity and the market in Asia. So this was I think in the 5-year plan of the Cambodian government, which is the first time we has in the last let's say 20 years that we have more concrete planning from the government. So which is also supported by the ILOs and I mean maybe capacity building and all the policy makings and others. So which is for the worker, which is quite positive, because we are happy. We wanna see more market for our products produced, and we want to have more value added product. So we want to also increase our standard of living. So we can't just stay at the cheap product forever. So that is the plan. I mean, that also the hope and the desires of the worker, and now the Cambodian government also try to incorporate it, which is good for us. So the question is, how do the worker get the space? I mean, in all this development. I mean, this is the thing that the big question for us. So in the pandemic, so we faced a lot of problems. So we lost a lot of wages, worker. So our first thing is, how can we work with all the stakeholder and the industrial union and all the NGO partner and others, ILO? How do we get some brand to take some responsible for what has been a hardship for worker during the pandemic? So that is the basic thing that worker are claiming, because company and the bank made a lot in the past. So, and worker, of course, when the brand make profit, we earn our wage, but our wage is quite low compared to the general living standard, in different countries. So, and when the pandemic came, we are even, suffering. I mean, the worker only get $70 a month, which is we lost $120 a month per workers. So let's see 6 months. So we have 1 million workers. So we lost quite enormous amount that pressure to the day-to-day living condition of the people. So this is the basic thing. And what is the, I said, how do we try to get a space in all these global things? So first thing, we are supporting the growing business, the diversifying market and value added product. But the difficulty that we challenge was how do we get a fair agreement? I mean, in the state, in Europe, we have a strong union there, more freedom there, so you can negotiate your good deal. You can negotiate your good deal. But here, it's very difficult. So, of course, my union is quite a strong union, but in the most difficult circumstance, so we cannot get that much. So that's why we try to link with the brand. We try to work with the international solidarity. So we want to build stronger alliance. So because if we can achieve like in in Germany or in Belgium or in other country which is they have strong CBA there, which is good. But here the employer is mostly, let's say, 95% against CBA, and the government is very scared that if we have the CBA, then the employer and the brand will leave our country because of the competitiveness. So all these things that we want to what you call hype the brand and also lobby the government and empower our worker power, whatever we can. So now this is a structure that the strategy that we want to place our power within all this global agreement and stuff that we are working. For example, we're working with currently with the 19 brand, which is called ACT, the Action, Collaboration, Transformation. So we want to have a what you call industrial living wage CBA. So we were started in 2017, and up to now we still renew it again, but we don't succeed because the brand has their own promise and their own goal, but the supplier say no, we didn't get much from the brand, so we can't negotiate anything additional for worker. So this is the new thing we want to see where in the coming new future. I mean, pandemic is one thing, but the new structure that worker want to see is where is the good agreement and where can we get a good living wage for our worker and people. So if the economy goes good, then we want the fair share from our for our members. So this is what we looking for, because people, a lot of institutions like ILO, like brand, like others, government say, oh yeah, we want a sustainability, we want a predictability, we want a competitiveness, but they put how they put that those workers in those things, but they don't put it. They put outside, so they don't want to negotiate. I mean, if you want predictability, there should be a strong agreement. There should be a strong union there. You should not dismiss all the union, dismiss all the real union every day, and try to find the escape way to abandon workers' power or worker voice in this process. That will not lead to the real sustainability. That is the union want to claim that in the future of sustainable industry. Yeah, thank you.
I think you started by saying you don't understand the complexity of what David was talking about, but I think you do. Um, so thanks for that. David Birnbaum, what recommendation would you be giving to Cambodia, having listened to Apit talking from a trade union perspective? The garment industry in Cambodia is important for jobs. It has a development. It has a development objective. Garment factories in Cambodia have played a developmental role in bringing people out of poverty, jobs, all sorts of things. These are important. Others talking about, if you want predictability, etc., your brands need to be paying more than a starvation wage. David Birnbaum, you're talking about globalization, moving to a regionalization. Having listened to Afid, what do you think Cambodia should be doing now?
Let me say this, having heard what he said, he is everything that is right about Cambodia. A strong labor union is important. And by the way, the minimum wages in Cambodia, especially with the latest awards, places them in a much better position. I know that recently the industry is going through terrible problems with their reliance on the United States and chaos and the orders getting canceled and everything. But they have a decent industry with decent factories. I'm talking about the product and a decent and decent products. Their customers are not going to be moving that fast to other countries. They have a good operation in Cambodia, and what is necessary is to not have a controversial an argument back and forth, but having the union, which is a very strong movement in Cambodia, with the foreign-owned companies and the customers to decide where to go next. Certainly, I would be thinking about moving two ways. First of all, garments, while still very important, are becoming less important to the economy, to the export industry. Cambodia has started doing other products, which I think is important. Secondly, they should start trading up. And the way to trade up is to go with the customer. The customers like Cambodia. They like working in Cambodia. And if Cambodian industry and the unions and workers get together and see, what do you want from me? How can I get into the better fashion goods? They're going to hear, there's going to be a receptive conversation. Remember, the customer cannot go to Myanmar. They're running out of places where they can get a decent product in fashion. It's not going to be easy, but I would put money on Cambodia before I would on most of the other countries in Asia.
Okay.
Sorry.
No. I'm just kind of interested in your views on that. David Williams, also thinking about what Afit's talking about. You gave us three possible scenarios, right? The repeat, the regain, the renegotiate. Yeah. You say your research is showing a lot of the stakeholders sitting somewhere between a repeat, normal, going back, the pre-pandemic, to a sort of an accelerate plus repeat, acceleration of repeat. Where do unions fit in that? When you're doing your focus groups and your interviews, where do unions fit in that repeat regain scenarios? Well,
that's a big question. We should maybe have an entire webinar on that.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
That very question, but no, I mean, in essence, when we looked at our scenarios, of course, as you would expect from the ILO, we would say the most transformative models are the ones that have the biggest central role for trade unions and for fundamental principles and rights at work, and the right to organize and the right to collectively bargain in the industry is absolutely crucial to any transformative model you want to build, and that's what ATIT is saying. But there is a sense at the moment that the unions have kind of been sat on the outside or pushed to the outside of some of the discussions around the future of the industry, especially when you talk about innovation and sustainability, innovation and competitiveness, and often the trade unions are not given the role that they need and not given the platform that they need. I wanted to kind of, for want of not wanting to pass on the question to Atit, but there are a couple of things that emerged, I think, from the pandemic that are maybe bright spots, possible bright spots for the union movement in terms of in the garment industry. That one of which is the renewed enthusiasm or renewed momentum around social protection, and this is something that the trade unions have been pushing for because it's one part of the kind of structural vulnerabilities of the industry. On the one side, you have the business model and the vulnerabilities on the business model. On the other side, you have domestically what kind of social support net you have for workers, and building that infrastructure. And during the pandemic, there have been new coalitions, new kind of groups that have advocated for investments in social protection, and they have managed to make some progress. So I would like to hear, you know, how Atit feels about that. And then the other one, the second one, which again comes into the kind of more transformative model for the industry, the renegotiate, is the fact that the governance, the public governance landscape is changing for the apparel supply chain. And particularly, I'm talking about the mandatory due diligence rules, and this move towards more public and mandatory rules rather than private and voluntary rules. And that is where a lot of hope for a renegotiate scenario, they really hinge on changes to the governance environment for many stakeholders. So I wonder, on both on the due diligence side and on the social protection side, how the trade unions think about that. Is that somewhere that is that a place where they've been heavily involved? Do they feel that they are still on the outside? Because I think if they're in those discussions, then they can really have a transformative effect on the industry.
Okay, Atit, did you catch that?
Yes.
Okay, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of opportunity for the worker for the expanding and improving the social protection scheme and quality. Yeah, so now recently the government has implemented the retirement scheme, the pension scheme. So which is it's very new for Cambodia, for private sector. So it already started the implementation from this month. So but still the coverage or the payments and the financial system that proposed by the government is very limited to the employer and the worker who has to contribute to the scheme. But from the union, we work with the brand, we work with the other alliance group that the brand and the government should also make this scheme or contribute to this scheme, or have the alternative, what they call foundations or sovereign pay funding, which is more like coverage to the worker who lost the job, and to the worker who factory closing, and the worker run away from the factory without paying legal sovereign pay to the worker. So that was the thing. But at least it go in the right direction. But we need to also So there's different idea, but the first step that we want to brand and the other stakeholder to contribute, like the government, is to to start a pilot that could be building the national social protection, the local national social protection in the future. So but now is very limited in its our own social protection benefit. So and this could help a lot to the worker themselves directly, and also help the union, because we have a lot of illegal dismissal in the country. So when the worker get dismissed, they lost all the job. If they get the illegal dismiss and then they don't have the job, then they are afraid to join the union. So if we have all this scheme and all this protection, so then the worker will be more willing and more brave to join the union. So this is what good for us, good for the worker, good for building the future of the union power in Cambodia, maybe in other countries as well. And for the due diligence, yeah, I think this is coming. This is coming, like the a lot of brands,
इसके अंदर आ जाओ ऑफिस के अंदर
a lot of things they start to engage, they start to introduce this. But from my view, we have a lot of in terms of capacity, that how do we be in the same page with all the brand, with all the big business, because they have a lot of legal capacity and economic capacity, but for us, we can't even understand the whole thing. So that part that we want the stakeholder like the ILO and like the others to really contribute to build the capacity and the resources for the union to be at the same level with the brand and with the with the multi company, international company. Then we can benefit from this new emerging the due diligence law that will be coming to the Asia, maybe in Cambodia and other countries. So we are very new to it. So we need a lot of capacity building to be engaged, to be benefit from this process as much as we can. Yeah.
I think the good news up it is that it's not only new to Cambodian trade unionists, it's new to a lot of retailers and Europeans, for example. A lot of German companies running around trying to understand what this new due diligence supply chain, excuse me. There's a lot of German companies trying to get their head around the new German Due Diligence Supply Chain Act that's going to be up and running in January next year. I just saw the German government put out a 38-page questionnaire for companies with multiple choice answers for the whole human rights due diligence practices that they've got to start doing. So don't worry. I think if Cambodian trade unions don't quite understand this, nor do a lot of the companies that have to implement it. It's a learning process for everybody. David Birnbaum, on this supply chain law, this mandatory human rights due diligence that we're seeing. We've got the Germans, we've got the European, the EU now. They've got a draft due diligence bill in place. We've got other players that have got various aspects of this already in place, or talking about putting it in place. Is this too little, too late in your scenario? I'd just like to hear your view on on this mandatory due diligence laws that are coming into place?
I do think it is a little late because governments are trying to play catch up. You know, when we look at things like sustainability, you know, we see the factory has water treatment, they have good machinery, but 70% of their electricity comes from coal. And the factory stands back and says, well, it's not our responsibility. We can't do anything about that. That's it. The same is true about labor laws. These are the labor laws. We have to follow the laws. The reality is that you can't hold the factory responsible when it's the government. And the only solution is to actually cause problems with the government. You have a union movement in Cambodia, and I must say, despite at its criticism, it's a very strong movement, and it's done a tremendous amount for the country. So for the first time, I can't think of a single Southeast Asian or a South Asian country where you have a union movement that's actually competent to speak for their workers. Usually, it's government and the factories together. Now you have a third party. They could affect change. I don't see the government doing that. I see the government doing too little, too late. What are they going to do? They're going to look around the country and say, these 30 factories are terrible. You can't ship garments. Well, the 30 factories changed their name. They moved to someplace else, and there are 6,000 factories. I mean, you're talking about industries where, in many cases, 50, 60% of the goods are subcontracted in the first place. You know what a Taj Mahal factory is? Taj Mahal factory is when you walk in, you can always see them because the entrance area is all marble. And there are 2 or 3 young women sitting at the desk, and they speak 170 languages. If you come in and you're an Uzbek person, they'll speak Uzbek. That's how they are. And if you go into the factory and you see it's a beautiful place, the machinery is great, the people are happy, they have a football team. And they have special holidays, it's great like this. And then when you add up the number of machines compared to the volume in units, you realize this represents about 9% of the company's production. Where's the other 91%? And how are due diligence going to deal with this? And, the terrible thing is that for those of us, we're all working on the ground. We see this every time. It comes naturally. Walk into the factory, oh my God, another one of these places. On the other hand, there are some really good factories around, and good factories in every country. People who you don't have to even have the laws because they're following it. If the minimum wage in Cambodia is $91, there are factories that are paying $150. Because if they pay $150, they can keep the worker, they can train the worker, and they can move up to higher quality value-added goods. They're in business, but they have to, because they recognize that maybe the worker is an important capital asset. I don't think legislation is going to really get to.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
No, I'm not here to give my opinion on this. I want to hear what the panelists have got to say. All right. We've got about 20 minutes left, and I want to get on to the future. So going back to David Williams, David, I think you've talked a little bit about what the future might look like, but I don't know. Is the pandemic over? Are we close to it being over? Who knows? But what does the future look like for for the focus groups that you're talking to? Do people talk about the future? And what trajectory would someone sitting in the ILO in Bangkok, involved in a better work? What should the future look like?
It's another huge.
That's another seminar, I know. But,
Indeed. What does the future look like? I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I mean the the stakeholders that we've been talking to during the pandemic, I would say, generally speaking, they have a sense that things need to change in the industry, and they do generally kind of converge around a vision of the future where the industry is kind of better governed, more competitive, more social and environmental issues are more central to the core business model. But where they then differ is whose responsibility is it to move first, who governs it, who enforces it. These kind of questions tend to, once you dig into it, they start to surface, and as a consequence, you get a range of different views. I mean, at the ILO, I do think, I mean, we're very interested in the way that the kind of governance landscape is changing, and that is changing. We don't know. I think that, of course, at the moment, it's still very much an unknown quantity, whether the extent to which that can be transformative or can move the needle, as it were, on some of these big priorities for sustainability. But we're also interested in the way business is done as well, regardless of regulation, and making the case for that business can be done in a sustainable way, that's also competitive, that also kind of includes workers in the process and gives them a better deal in the business model. At the moment, we're still kind of mulling over, the extent to which the industry has changed and the extent to which it's unchanged. But there are some big picture changes which I think should be ones to watch. I think we have seen an overall contraction in the number of people who are employed in the industry, and I don't think that is going to change. I think it was David or Atit or both who mentioned that. I think the fact that we're in Asia, we're at something like a 30-year low in terms of the number of people employed in the garment industry, and until now that has not been because of technological displacement, although that may feature more heavily in the coming years. It's more about the diversification of those economies, those fast-growing economies. Vietnam, garments, until a few years ago, garments were the most important industry, and now Vietnam is looking to electronics and looking to higher value manufacturing sectors. So I think that's one area to look at. I think the new coalitions and the new collaborations that we're seeing coming out of the pandemic, that's another thing to watch, because I think conversations between trade unions and brands, there is more platforms for dialogue now post-pandemic, and there are initiatives around, for example, the Sustainable Terms of Trade initiative that GIZ is involved in, trying to renegotiate the purchasing practices and purchasing behavior in the supply chain. And as I mentioned before, the moves around social protection, and again around governance, the move towards public governance rather than private governance. I think these are all areas to watch, and would be, if we're going to try and figure out what the actual scenario that plays out, it will be dependent on what happens in those areas.
David Birnbaum, without giving away any trade secrets, but what are you advising your clients that they need to do to stay competitive, to stay in the industry, over the next medium to 5 years out? What do they need to be doing?
That's how I make my living. Okay. People are going to be wearing garments in the future. That will always.
Okay.
They will be spending a smaller percent of the disposable income. This has been going on for some years. There are, going forward, let's say 10 years from now, there are going to be people who will look back at this moment and say, this was the beginning. This is where we got started. This is where we began. Because they took some opportunities. And there are unbelievable opportunities out there because the truth is everybody's in a state of confusion. Nobody, whether we're talking about the factories, we're talking about the retailers, we're talking about the internet, nobody understands what's happening, but they do see that what we are doing now has failed. So it's better to just make the effort and do something, and chances are you're going to be a success at it because there are very few people who are doing that. Most people are stuck in the past. Most people, I teach from time to time. One of the problems I have is that people who are teaching in my industry, they're living in the 1970s. Ours is the fastest moving industry, I think, in the world. Oh my God, you're in the computer business. You have what, 20 models a year, 50 models a year. You're in the garment factory. You can have 1,000. You can have 1,000 styles a month. It moves like that, and you have to be part of it. You have to have a vision. You take the vision and you create a strategy. You have a strategy, and you create a working model. And the number of things out there, I don't want to, I don't mind describing, but the idea of having a store factory at the same location, where you have a woman who comes in, looks at the garment, and says, I want that. And that afternoon, she can have the garment in her size. And I don't mean her size, small, medium, large. I'm talking about her size to fit her, because we have the technology and we have the costs. People should just start doing this. It's very difficult to go talk to a mill, talk to a factory about going on to non-woven fabric, which God only knows is the future. And having says, something, not interested. Too much money, by the way, it is a lot. But these are the things that are happening, whether you join or not. The future will be there. It'll just be new players.
So in general, you're quite optimistic.
I'm always optimistic. My God, I'll shoot myself. I've heard optimistic.
I can see you're an optimistic guy. I bet. Are you optimistic about what lies ahead for Cambodian workers? If we're coming out of the pandemic, are you optimistic about what happens for workers?
Yeah. So I would answer from my sense. I think the most important is to keep the strong and independent unions. So I think this will handle many difficulties. So for me, I think Cambodian workers and some of the good independent union, they have a quite strong base. So we need to escalate that, and then we will. I mean, there's two things that we waiting for, or we don't waiting for. So we waiting for everything that's set and designed for us, all this thing, or we try to fight to create a place for us. So that is my concept. I mean, we of course, as long as we have a strong ground union, so we will have a little bit much better future. So that is the thing I can do. I can make my prediction. But for the all those global business and structures and economic, so we will see how much capacity we can, place our workers in, and to see what is the current capacity that the worker can fight back, and to be more conscious on to be well informed, to work with the alliance, so then we can have a more better future. So I think we have to hold our future in our hand as much as we can. So that's what I can say. Yeah.
Thanks, Abid. I'm just going to ask the IT people if they could put the poll, a short survey, into the chat box. So in the chat box, a link will pop up It's a little survey poll that you can do for us so that GIZ Fabric can improve these, can look for new topics. You can tell us what you think we should do to do things better. These things really do help us. So please just take a moment to click on the link. If Rebecca, yep, so Rebecca's just put that in there. Also, I see in the chat box that Rebecca has also put in some information from David Williams on the ILO Better Work Cornell research with some of the papers there. You've got something on the supply chain ripple effect. And then you've got a paper on repeat, regain, or renegotiate. So if you want to follow up some of that stuff that David Williams was talking about, those 3 scenarios that he talked about, particularly at the beginning, that paper goes into more depth. And then there's a forthcoming one, unpublished, of updated industry data and industry focus groups, which will be out in the next couple of weeks, so later this month or into November. So it's just, do any of you gentlemen have any final words that you want to say? Anything that you think that you've been holding on to that you really want to tell us? Your last moment to tell us something. David Williams, any last words?
Nothing too grandiose, Stephen. Just really to say that, I mean, I think I didn't want to give the impression in my overview that the sector was standing still, or that the sector was not doing some of the work it needs to do to reform and improve. I think that has always been the case. My issue is around COVID being the turning point, and COVID being the fork in the road, as I said at the beginning. I think the idea that or our experience from previous crises has not always been a good one, in the sense of prompting people into new ways of thinking. I think at the moment of crisis, when we're dealing with the fallout, when we're recognizing, when we're seeing all of the vulnerabilities and challenges kind of brutally exposed, we have this kind of human urge to say that this can't happen again, that that things need to change. There needs to be a reset, as you said. My issue is really that the industry was making some changes prior to the pandemic and continues to make some changes after the pandemic, but the pandemic itself, maybe in a few years' time, we'll look back and say that it wasn't a huge turning point that it was billed to be at the time.
Right, David Birnbaum, last words. Well, not last words, but final.
This is not a time for incremental change. I hate to say it, this is not a time to make things better, to make things more productive, more efficient, more profitable. This is not a question of our willingness to change. The change is beyond us. It's beyond our control. Those people who don't embrace the change are going to be out of business. That's the nature of the garment industry, by the way. I think the garment industry has the highest rate of attrition of any industry in the world, possibly other than bad Italian restaurants. You know? It's hard to survive in our industry, and you better be thinking ahead all the time.
Fair enough. Last words to you, Atet. Last words from Cambodia. Then we're going to call it a day.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, so I think we expect that the partners and the stakeholders, beside the strong union, beside the support from different, so we also expect that the partner and the stakeholder and the alliance who work to build or to support the worker right is more synchronized, more united, more. So we can have to leverage the capacity and the unities between. I mean, from our side, from the worker side, we have nothing else. We have the most big
ingredient and superpower for us is unity. So that's why. So I mean, we can describe many things about unity. So, but we have the power to strike. We have the power to do things, but we also need the power of knowledge and information and solidarity from things. So that part we expect that we will build those strong alliance and like the platform, like the ILO bill and the other platform that exists, that can empower the workers for the better power for the negotiation in the future. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you to all of our panelists. Without them, we wouldn't have this with this panel. So on behalf of GIZ FABRIC, I thank all three of you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know you're all busy. Just to remind you, if you look in the chat box, there is the link to our survey poll. If you've got a minute, please take the time to click on that and just do that. That does help us out. Next week in our technical webinar, we will be looking in depth at decarbonisation. We'll be hearing from a couple of factories who have been reducing emissions through various technological solutions. So come along and listen to the owners of those factories talk about what they've been doing, you know, return on investment, et cetera, and how that's going for them. We'll also have someone, another expert, to talk about that in a bigger context. So that's next week's online seminar, technical seminar. It's not moving the needle. It's not a broad seminar like this. That's a very deep dive into a very technical issue. But if you're interested in that, please keep an eye out for the invitation. All that remains is for me to thank all the people who have attended. Once again, thank the panelists. And to all of you, stay safe, stay well, and goodbye from us at GIZ FABRIC. Thank you.